Okay, hello Internet family. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib, and you are listening to the Bloody Lampshade podcast. So, Bloody Lampshade is a relatively new podcast or vlog that I started, and the focus of it is horror. It basically caters to my love for the horror genre, and my past fascination with scary movies. So today's podcast is going to be about the movie Renfeld, and I'm going to talk a little. So the movie Renfeld that is out right now is not necessarily horror so much as it is comedy horror. So it is comedy. It's a comedy, but it is based on old vampire movie tropes with a mixture of modern day topics about the relationship between Renfeld and his master, Count Dracula. So horror comedy, I'm going to talk a little bit about horror comedy. So comedy horror, also known as horror comedy, is a literary television and film genre that combines elements of comedy and horror fiction. This actually dates back to the first time I can remember. So at first I was going to say another movie, but actually I would be mistaken on that because I can remember years ago because I'm a fan of classic movies. And so I like to watch old black and whiters. And I remember the first time I saw horror and comedy mixed. It was Abbott and Costello. I can't remember if it was Abbott and Costello meets the werewolf, or I'm trying to remember who they were in the film with. I think it might have been a combination of all three. And the big three in monster movies are Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the werewolf. Vampires, werewolves, and Dr. Frankenstein's monster. A lot of people mistakenly call the monster Frankenstein, but really the Frankenstein is the scientist that created the monster. And I can remember seeing the original Frankenstein many, many times. Also seeing The Bride of Frankenstein many, many times. And so if you're a person that you're history buff and you like to go back in time and watch, some of these movies. And the first time I saw horror comedy was Abbott and Costello, and I believe it was they met the Wolfman. But there was also the Three Stooges. I think might have even made their own version because people tend to copycat a lot. And so like I said before, typically when you're talking about horror comedy, what you're seeing is something like the Wayans Brothers Scary Movie. Another example is Eddie Murphy's Vampire in Brooklyn, where they're combining comedy. It's being made by people who are known for comedy, but there are also a lot, elements of horror in it. So let me see here. So comedy horror has been described as able to be categorized under three types: black comedy, parody, and spoof. It often crosses over with the black comedy genre. Comedy horror can also parody or subtly spoof horror. As I said earlier, it kind of pokes fun it typically kind of pokes fun at reoccurring themes that show up in horror films. Like if you're a vampire fan, then you know what it takes to kill a vampire. You know what it takes. You know what, for want of a better phrase, because I'm crossing genres here, But you know what Dracula's, you know what all three of these, I'm trying to remember, you know what all three of these are the three major monster movies, or horror monsters. And you also know, if you're a real big fan, what their kryptonite is. So with werewolves, you know what it takes to bring them out, usually a full moon. It also takes a silver bullet to kill one. With Dracula or vampires, usually it's, the first dawn of the day. They also can't deal with, they're allergic to holy water or holy oil because of the, sanctimonious of it. They also, you can also take them out with a wooden stake. And people oftentimes, when they want to get a vampire out of their face, they will pull a cross up and put it out, and that'll keep them at bay. So, hold on here. Let me get my stuff out here. So because of these reoccurring themes within horror, okay, they have it right here. So Abbott and Costello met Frankenstein. So that's what they call a comedy horror movie. I recommend that you see it. Of course, people talk about movies that don't age well because of themes that are now that people find offensive now that they didn't find offensive at the time of the show or movie. So here lately, like I said before, I've been watching a lot of old sitcoms, and one of the things I like about, I've been at that place. I'm not stuck or anything, not even spiritually stuck. It is a journey that I feel like I'm on because I'm looking at much of the stuff that I watched back when I was younger, and I'm seeing, how do I feel about these themes now that I'm, 56-year-old mother of 2 grown children and grandmother of a 4-year-old. And your mind, you're not, 56 is a whole lot different than 6. So for every 10 years you give yourselves, let's say the difference between you at 6 years old and you at 16, that's a huge difference. Huge difference. Nobody expects those 2 people to be the same at all. If you expect your 16-year-old to still act like they're 6, something's wrong with you. Because they're not going to act like they did at 6. At least they shouldn't be acting. A whole lot of developmental things going on. You're also not going to be the same at 26 as you were at 16. So every decade that you give yourself, you should see some significant change in the way you think, what you value. And so, that's where I've been on that. And I was just thinking about Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. And here, like I said, all information that I'm giving as reference is coming out of Wikipedia, one of my favorite sources. Author Bruce Hallenbeck cites the short story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving as the first great horror comedy. I can kind of see that. The story made readers laugh one moment and scream the next. Its premise was based on mischief typically found during the holiday Halloween. So Renfeld is after that tradition. It takes the Dracula story, and for many of you that don't know, so many of you who may be asking, well, who was Renfeld? So I remember when I first saw the ads, which is proof that they were doing their job, I was like, oh yeah, I really want to see this. Because being a fan of old school black and white horror, they made the Nicolas Cage, they modeled him after the first after Bela Lugosi, the most famous portrayal of Dracula. So Renfield was the assistant that was always eating bugs. I just remember this guy, always eating. Everywhere they showed him, he was eating bugs, and I think he kind of crossed over, because I kind of remember a bug eating assistant in the movie Young Frankenstein. And so Young Frankenstein was also comedy horror, and it starred as Frankenstein. It starred. Let me look here, because I don't want to be saying nothing wrong. So another example of horror comedy is the movie Young Frankenstein. So Young Frankenstein was made in the 70s. And I believe the actor that played Frankenstein's monster was. So let me look at the cast. So if you're an Everybody Loves Raymond fan, then you'll remember Ray's dad. Well, Ray's dad, when he was much younger, played the monster. Actor Peter Boyle, who's no longer with us and missed, played in it and played the monster. So this was also another example of horror comedy. This movie was made by, starred Gene Wilder, who you remember, some of y'all remember from the movies he made with comedian Richard Pryor. Stir Crazy, Blue Streak, I think the one was when he was with the train. They made a series of movies together because they were able to play off each other so well. And so, let me see, there was Igor. I'm trying to remember because I remember in a couple of them. So Marty Feldman as Igor. So it looks like I might be getting Igor, and Mel Brooks was the werewolf. I'm trying to remember if there was a guy in there, but I do remember there possibly being an assistant in there that was kind of modeled after Renfield, where he was also. But the one thing I remember about Renfield was that he was constantly eating bugs. He was gross. He was, and there have been several characters in vampire movies that were based on the Dracula trope, where he had this assistant, and the system was under his complete control. And like I said, I remember him eating bugs. So Renfield was a fictional character who appears in Bram Stoker's 1897 Gothic horror film novel, Dracula. He's his deranged, fanatically devoted servant and familiar, helping him in his plan to turn Mina Harker into a vampire in return for a continuous supply of insects to consume and the premise of immortality. Although throughout the novel he resides in an asylum where he is treated by Dr. John Seward. So, in the various film adaptations of the novel, he has been portrayed by actors such as Alexander Granach, Dwight Fry, Klaus Kinski, Tom Waits, Peter McNichol, and Nicholas Hoult. Okay, so Nicholas Hoult is the actor who portrays him in the movie Renfeld, in the movie named after his character, which is Renfeld. So there have been characters over the years. So let me see here. Okay, so now, although he is not President Van Helsing, so here in the section where it talks about characters based on Renfeld, in the TV adaptation. So here is where my confusion was. In 2004, in the movie Van Helsing, Igor takes up the mantle of Dracula's servant, ready to do his bidding. So he, there's different adaptations of the character. He survived all these years, and obviously he survived pretty well, because I even remember him, eating bugs, and I was actually correct about that portion of his character. So in this movie they take a so let me look here, because I have. Okay, so Igor is more associated with Frankenstein. And I remember The Hunchback. So I think a lot of people, when they're making movies or doing their research, they must be getting the two. But, he's Frankenstein. So Igor is Dr. Frankenstein's assistant. And I don't know what it is with them. Maybe, making them eat bugs is a way of making them even creepier, because they're pretty creepy. But back to the film. So this recent appearance that Renfeld makes is in the 2023 American comedy horror with his name on it. So Renfeld is played. So in this one, and I just mentioned the young man's name, by an actor named Nicholas Hoult, and I believe he's British. Yeah, he's an English actor. I got a feeling some of you young ladies will probably, if you haven't, he's 33, and I believe we're gonna see a whole lot more of him, if we haven't already, because I'm up there. So he was in a movie called About a Boy. So let me see. So he's been acting since 1996. His first movie was Intimate Relations, About a Boy, Wah Wah, The Weatherman. Yeah, I'm just looking at this. He's starred in a few X-Men, Young Ones, Underdogs. I'm trying to see if there's any movies that Deadpool 2, Tolkien, and he played J.R.R. Tolkien. And many of you know that Mr. Tolkien was responsible for the Lord of the Rings novels and wrote The Hobbit. Okay. And they mentioned Renfield. He also was in Nosferatu. So Nosferatu is the very first on-film depiction of So let me look here. So Nosferatu, the vampire. The very first. Basically Nosferatu was like the very first film depiction of the vampire character. I can't remember if he's actually Dracula or not, but he's, and it's a film about that, and it's to be announced. So it hasn't been made yet. He's supposed to be in Garfield, which is coming in 2024, and another movie called The Order. So he's also done TV work. He does look familiar. But anyway, back to the film. So the film kind of not only pokes fun of vampire tropes, it also pokes fun at our current obsession with toxic versus non-toxic relationships, and how many of us get very emotionally attached and get in unhealthy relationships, and then didn't have difficulty unattaching or coming away from the person. So, to me, the new millennium term for abusive relationships is now toxic. And my take on that has always been when neither party wants to admit to being abusive, so we just call the whole thing toxic, because now there's this thing where both people are acting really, really crazy with each other, or feeding into a dynamic of crazy, and both people are contributing to the abuse. Usually abuse is a little more complicated than that, but how to get free. And so the first time I remember seeing the ads for this movie, Renfeld shows up to a group support. He shows up to, I like the addition of mental health in here. So he shows up to a group therapy session where people are meeting and talking. So group therapy, for those who are not familiar, most people think of therapy as, you one-on-one, but many people go to group therapy. Group therapy is kind of similar to like Alcoholics Anonymous or different support groups. And many people recommend, group therapy is one of those things that can be a help. It can also be a hindrance. It depends on the dynamic of the group. So Renfield shows up because he's having difficulty getting free from this toxic relationship that he has with Nicolas Cage's vampire character. So this film is written and directed and produced by a man named Chris McKay. So Chris McKay is an American filmmaker and animator. He's best known for directing and editing 3 seasons of Robot Chicken, 2 seasons of Moral Oral. I remember both of these shows. And he made his feature directorial debut with the Lego Batman movie, and has also directed the Tomorrow War. And so now he has brought us Renfield. So now he's brought us Renfield. I have to say it is a pretty good movie. The film also stars. Let me see here. Hold on. And so the film was directed by Chris McKay, but written by a man named Ryan Ridley, from a story by Robert Kirkland, who also served as producer, inspired by characters from the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. The film stars Nicholas Hoult, who I just got done talking about, Awkwafina, who is a comedian, Ben Schwartz, Adrian Martinez, Sheree, Lord, these last names, Agadashlu, and Nicolas Cage, who I already mentioned. So this film was announced in 2014. So if you remember what I said when I was doing the Spinning Gold review or commentary about how many times the script will sit around in Hollywood for years. I still call it Hollywood. It's the entertainment industry, I know. But many times they will have a script around for decades before the movie finally gets made. And I remember that was the case with The Bodyguard. Whitney Houston. Now Whitney Houston's famous for The Bodyguard. But at one point, I would say probably in the late 70s, early 80s, they were wanting Ryan O'Neal and Diana Ross. That's how old that script is. And like I said, also, they were trying to make a movie with Josephine Baker, who they finally made with Lynn Whitfield. But I can remember there was buzz, and I'm all the way here in Ohio, and remember there being buzz about them looking for a black actress to portray her. Same with the Dorothy Dandridge story, which eventually went to Halle Berry. But I can remember there were actresses that they were trying out, like Donna Summer and Diana Ross. They waited until everybody got old and they had to go through a bunch of new actresses to get the part played. But the film was announced in 2014, so it's 2023 now? Right. Focusing a story of the character of Renfeld in the classic monster universe, but the film entered development hell. So development hell, also known as development purgatory or limbo, is media and software industry jargon for a project, idea, or concept that remains in a stage of early development for a very long time because the project is stuck in legal, technical, or artistic challenges. A work may move between many sets of artistic leadership crews, scripts, games. So if you remember when I was doing my commentary on Spinning Gold, they changed directors because Spike Lee just didn't have time. And, that kind of was disappointing because I would have loved to see what Spike Lee would have been able to do with that film. Because he is the king of atmospheres, of taking you back in time and making you think you're in a time machine. If you really want to see an example of his work with taking people back to the 70s, his film Summer of Sam is a classic because it takes you back to what New York was like during the time of the Son of Sam killings, murders, and how it wasn't about, he showed like scenes from the Son of Sam, but it was not just about the Son of Sam. It was really about New York in the 70s during that time period and what it was like for the people to keep hearing about these murders that were occurring and how people were, living their lives and doing whatever. So back to Renfield, the film entered development hell after the commercial failure of The Mummy. Ouch. Kirkland later pitched a newer version of the film to the studio, leaning more into the comedic aspects of the story, and the production rights were acquired by Skybound Entertainment. Dexter Fletcher was originally announced as a director in 2019, but McKay eventually replaced him, working off the Ridley script and Kirkland's original pitch. Much of the cast joined between 2021 to January 2022, and filming took place from February to August 2022. The budget was on a production budget of $65 million. So Renfeld has had its world premiere at the Overlook Film Festival March 30th, 2023, and was released in the United States April 14, 2022 by Universal Pictures. The film received mixed reviews from critics who praised the comedic tone and performance but criticized the screenplay and story. It has grossed 24 million worldwide. So they took a loss. Needless to say, they took a loss. So, some thoughts about Renfield. So, in the early 20th century, in the plot, the early 20th century Transylvanian vampire Count Dracula meets English lawyer R.M. Renfeld. Renfeld hopes to broker a deal for some land, and after proving to be a useful assistant, he ends up being Dracula's familiar. So, a familiar, also known as a familiar spirit, is a spirit. So I'm going to read their definition. And it says, this is European folklore of the medieval and early modern periods. And so strictly familiar spirits as familiar also meant close friend or companion, and may be seen in the scientific name for dog, Canis familiars. So these were believed to be supernatural entities or spiritual guardians that would protect and are assist witches and what they call cunning folk in their practice of magic. So cunning folk, because we know what people think of witches, are practices of folk medicine, helpful folk magic, and divination in in Europe in the Middle Ages. Their practices were also known as cunning craft, and it was supposed to thwart witchcraft. So if you familiar with some of the debates about African spirituality and witchcraft and magic and people who deal with that type of spirituality, you hear a lot of people. So a lot of born-again Christians don't believe in messing around with witchcraft and familiar spirits, because familiar spirits are believed to be demonic, and the power behind witchcraft is believed to be demonic. So of course, if a person is caught up in like voodoo, black magic, and different other spirituality that is non-Christian, you have people who get offended. Well, this is racist. You're saying this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, it's not based on race, because there are plenty of Europeans that mess around with witchcraft as well. So it's not about the race of the person. It's about the supernatural background of the practice that the person is dealing with. So Renfeld becomes a familiar, and allows him to be immortal and gain super strength and speed when he consumes bugs. 90 years later, Renfeld has grown weary and exhausted of bringing victims to Dracula, as well as Dracula's abuse of him. They recently had a close call with some vampire hunters who almost killed the Count, so the duo moves to New Orleans to recoup. There, Renfeld discovers a 12-step self-help group for persons with codependent relationships, and plans to hunt out the group's abusive lovers so that he can give them to Dracula to feed on without feeling remorse, by following one to a warehouse with stolen dogs. So I'm not going to give you the whole story or anything, but basically he was hunting down their abusive lovers. So the people who were part of his group support, he was hunting down the people that they were in therapy about. I remember being on this one Facebook page following this one Facebook page, and one of the statements that they made was like, how many people are in therapy for people who don't go to therapy? And I thought, that's an interesting point. Many people are in therapy because of someone who has a bunch of unhealed stuff that they ain't dealing with. And what they ain't dealing with is causing them to hurt or abuse others. And so now they're in therapy. Everybody that they come in contact with is in therapy because of what they're doing to them. So, let me see here. So that's basically the synopsis of the story. I personally would give this movie probably about 4 stars out of 5, because there were parts of it that seemed to not transition very well. So if you've ever watched a movie where they do flashbacks, or they, where they do a lot of flashbacks, I remember one of the complaints with Godfather 2 was the amount of jumping back and forth between flashbacks that was going on with the movie. This movie, and when they do it, flashbacks are cool. Like a few flashbacks are cool, and flashbacks are cool if you're able to transition well. And so this movie seemed to not transition from, scene to scene. There seemed to be a lot of stuff where you had to ask yourself, okay, well, what happened to lead to this part? And so, because like I said, I like to do my reviews in such a way, or my commentary in such a way. But what I did like was the fact that they took a story that is centuries old, and they brought and put in a new spin on it and gave it a comedic flair. They not only made fun of the vampire tropes, and there are plenty, like I said, they not only took the humor of the traditional vampire tropes, which are, the ways to kill Dracula. Like I said, he's allergic to holy water. He's allergic to sunlight. He can't bear up well. If you hold a cross to him, it's not good for him. He also, dies by way of he typically dies by way of a wooden stake through his heart. And so they wind up, and I thought it was interesting that they went new age with their ability to get rid of him this time. And sort of I'm like, okay, I'm not going to tell you, I'm trying to leave no spoilers in this. Like I said, I would give it a 4 as far as the movie itself, the ideas that spawned the movie, because it was pretty good. It was very funny. But there are also parts where you almost had difficulty transitioning from scene to scene. And when they transitioned, it was like, they brought some new development in, and you're like, okay, but where does that come from? The ability to connect the dots. And so I also think that it was released at a time where there are a lot of heavy-hitting movies coming out right now. So people making the decision of where to spend their $10 for a movie ticket in order to go to see a movie probably is a reason for the loss. I don't know how well it's doing now. But if you are if you're a person that likes to go and see vampire movies and likes to go if you like keeping up with vampire tropes and you enjoy humor surrounding the whole vampire experience, like I said, I've never seen any of the Twilight movies because I don't really like my vampires romantic. There is dark romance in some of the Dracula movies that are just plain horror and no comedy. except for a few humorous one-liners. But I tend to like my vampires scary, period. So Nicolas Cage in all the years that I have seen him in movies, has always been able to bring the comic relief to many of the parts that he plays. And he does not, and he doesn't disappoint in this. In fact, everybody pretty much does a good job as far as the acting and everything. Like I said, I can understand what people meant about the storyline, because it wasn't a bad storyline, and it wasn't even bad ideas that went into it. It was just the continuation, like as they directed it and everything. For me, it was the continuation. It just didn't seem to transition from scene to scene very well. But other than that, if you are looking for a movie that you can rent on YouTube or that you can look at, because I'm pretty sure it's probably, let me look here, because I always like to see how quickly something winds up on YouTube. So let me see here. If you're looking for a movie that you can rent on YouTube, let me see how much it's going for if it's on YouTube. Yep, it's on YouTube already. So let me see. Oh, so wait a minute. So to rent it, so it's still high right now. I would wait a couple weeks. I don't know, like, because usually, so they're renting it now. So it's on YouTube right now. It's made it to YouTube. They're making it to YouTube like almost a week after they're in the theaters. Okay, week or two. They're renting it for $19.99. That is high. That's almost more than it is to go and see it in the theater. And I'm looking in some of the reviews, they're talking about the ending leaving you disappointed. I already gave away a little more than I wanted to give away, as far as that goes. But I think right now, I think one of the reasons why it hasn't done as good as it could have done as far as box office, also, like I said, the movie release right now is very saturated. Like, there are a lot of movies coming out, and they're being released all at the same time. And movies are not cheap. Like, it's $10 basically to go and see a movie unless you have some type of discount. If you have a favorite, now let me tell you, as a frequent moviegoer, myself and the Queen Mother, I highly recommend that the theaters you go to, that you participate in their rewards program. If you go a lot, like I go a lot, and make sure that you get your points, because Cinemark has a program where if you get so many points and it rolls over, they have one that's $9.99 per month, and that $9.99 covers the cost of a ticket. If you, let's say you go a few months without going, but you still keep paying them, you can wind up going to the movies for free and only having to pay for your popcorn or your treats. And you get a discount on your popcorn and your treats if you let them scan your little thing. Many of the movie theaters are doing a lot of points programs or reward programs, just like a lot of the fast food people are. I recommend that you do that so that you can save some money if you're a person who likes the feel of going to the movies and not staying at home. for this movie, I wouldn't pay $20 to sit at home and watch. Nobody. I would wait a couple of weeks. I would wait maybe 2-3 more weeks for that movie to come down to like maybe $3.99, $5.99, $7.99, just like any of these other movies. YouTube is usually, with YouTube's movie program, I will say this much. They're usually, like I said, they're becoming, some of them are becoming high, but it's also a movie that is still first run. So it's still in a lot of theaters, so that's probably one of the reasons. But usually you can find a decent movie on YouTube for probably like somewhere between $3.99, $5.99, $6.99, at the most $7.99. Okay, I would wait. This is one I would wait until it came down a little bit if you want to see it. If you want to see it now, your best bet would be to go to the movie theater, because you would only be paying $10, which is half of what you would be paying to stay at home and watch it on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it's on a lot more. I'm pretty sure it's on other streaming services right now too. But it is But I will say this: if you're a person who likes to see things really quick, and you don't really like the crowd, don't want to deal with the movie crowds or different anything like that, YouTube is probably your best bet, because they will, you'll get it pretty quick. You'll pay $20, but you will be able to watch it at home, and I think you can keep it for at least 24 to 48 hours. So that means you can watch it more than one time if you would like to. But I'm going to go ahead and give it 4 stars. My recommendation, I would give it first run. I don't really have a problem with giving it my first run stamp of approval. It is a pretty good movie. It is very funny in places. If you are a vampire movie fan, you will get the humor in most of the places where the humor is placed and everything. I like the modern day spin on it, where they involve group therapy and 12-step program. Especially if you've been a victim of the pandemic and been inside, which the globe was, you probably got to see quite a few videos on narcissistic abuse. I watched this one. I watched, what's her name, Dr. Romani or whatever. And by the time they got done with me, I felt like I had a PhD in narcissistic abuse. I had to take a breather. Okay? And I am a psychology person. I'm a psych major. And I still yet had to go, woof, child. By the time I got done watching so many movies on abuse and abusive relationships and toxic relationships. So I like the modern spin that they gave the Dracula story, because he is narcissistic, and Renfeld is being abused. So I'm going to go ahead and get off here, because I have some more podcasts to record. But you guys have a good one, and peace out. Hello, you have reached the message line for Adam's Rib Media Ministry. If you would like to give me a shout out, recommend some topics for discussion, or give an opinion about some topics that I've already discussed, either here on my podcast or on my blogs, leave me a message and I will get right back to you. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.